Snipe. Oh god, the chat. I wish you guys could see this on the overlay. Push back the bio and pick off the liberators. In the late game, it kind of plays out in the same way as disruptors do, in that you can't fully engage the Terran player extremely late game unless you have something like Tempest, which for me personally, I will go into about like 4 bases if my Terran opponent also gets up to 4 bases and they stabilize. Around like the 4 base, 5 base stage in the game is when you would want to be a little bit more cautious about that. But Charge Zealots, Blink Stalkers, and Psionic Storm, or even Adept Attack Speed, Blink Stalkers and Psionic Storm, works really well at defending early game Liberator pushes. Those little dangerous spots you could have the Observer patrol a small distance and cover it. Yeah, that is true. That would be a good thing to do. One thing, I try to avoid doing that on situations where the medevacs can actually drop, because it's a lot easier to see the Observer if it's moving. Terran players are kind of like dinosaurs in that their vision is based on movement. And so if the Observer is patrolling, it's a lot easier for them to actually see it and then scan it. So unless you're flying over like a dead airspace, I typically would avoid doing that. And let's go into this. We've already talked a little bit about how hard it is to kill a Terran player. I think I will include this replay pack, or this replay in the replay pack. But it's a very similar situation as the previous 2 games, or not even the last game, but it's the same situation as the first game, where it's a little bit difficult to actually kill the Terran player. It's a lot more effective for you as a gateway-centric Protoss player to deny expansions and out-macro them. So I'm actually we've already run up to 53 minutes, and I think I originally pegged this to go for about an hour. I'm gonna go ahead and go into these 2 replays about pressure, and then I'll keep this included in the replay pack so you can see just another example of exactly how difficult it is to kill a Terran player. As opposed to just denying bases, and once you max, go in for a push. And so the first 2 replays that we watched were primarily about expanding aggressively and denying expansions from the Terran opponent. And these next 2 games, I'm be showing you a similar style, but a different flavor, a little bit more aggressive. And this is something that I've been playing around a lot more with lately, just because I found this to be very fun. Similar to the way that I found... And I'm going to have to fix the game sounds again. I'm sorry that it defaults just so loud, because this has to be played offline. Let's bring this down to 5%. Bring music down a little bit. Continuous music, play in background. I'm getting a lot more efficient at this, aren't I? Always, unclickable, always. This should be everything. Yeah, that looks good. As I was saying, the first 2 replays focus primarily on out-expanding the Terran opponent, denying their 4th base, or if you can't deny their 4th base, eventually denying their 5th base, which admittedly, if it gets to that stage of the game, it's a little bit tougher, just because Terran late game is so strong, but it would have been difficult regardless of what composition you go for. Even if it's disruptor play, it's a little bit difficult to deal with Terran once they get on 4 bases, in my personal opinion. Just because Liberators scale so well in the late game, particularly with Ghosts. But these next 2 games we're going to be focusing on a more aggressive play style. So if you're the kind of player that wants to play really aggressively, do a lot more harassment in the early game, you don't want to just go with 1 Warp Prism and try and do pressure. You want to go ahead and, say, proxy Stargate and go for Oracles, or go for like a really quick Dark Templar drop or anything like that. These next 2 games are going to showcase exactly how to play aggressively and still go for the same eventual mid-game composition. The openings are very different. It's a very different flavor of the style, but the end game, getting into the mid game, getting on 3 bases and using a gateway heavy army with significant upgrades, as opposed to going for disruptors, is going to be about the same. And so what we saw here with our probe scout, we did scout after gateway. We scouted. Let me go back and show you this actually, because this is, I think, a pretty critical point. Let's see, where is our scouting probe? Let's follow our scouting probe all the way across the map. So we're going gateway, taking our gas, going 19 nexus. That nexus should be going on very shortly. Very, very shortly. There's our nexus. And now we're going into our Terran opponent's base. And at this timing is when the first barracks will be completed, right around the same time as your first gateway. Saying this confirms that there's no proxy Reaper shenanigans, which are pretty popular on this map around this location, or this location. Similar to the way it is on Dust Towers. And then moving into the main mineral line, you're going to see me select this, if the replay actually does pick that up. I don't think it did. But being able to click on the refinery, the timing that you're looking for is once the barracks has completed, the Terran player would want to have mined 50 gas from the refinery. And then you can see directly either 2 things are going to happen. You're going to see either a Reaper coming out, which is the most likely scenario, or you're going to be seeing a reactor. And one thing that's a little bit more common these days is Terran players will go for the same opening and they'll build a marine and a quick factory. But for the most part, it's either going to be a Reaper and then a reactor, or it's just going to be straight reactor. Those are the two most popular openings, at least that I see in my games. And as I was saying before, earlier in the day, when you see a Terran opponent going for Reaper and then reactor, you actually have a really great opportunity as the Protoss player to go for pylon pressure, because the Reaper is very good at doing economic damage to you, but it's very poor at defending. And the reactor takes a very long time to build, 36 seconds. So the unit count of the Terran player is actually very low. So me seeing this is one of the reasons why I decide, and again, me seeing the 50 gas mined and then no reactor right away, is one of the reasons that I decided to go for this very aggressive opening. And so if you're wondering what some of the cues are that I look for in my games when I'm going through something like this is the kind of an example. So here we are. Everything's playing out normally. We're going ahead and chrono boosting our mothership core out. We're getting our adept. One thing that may be a little bit different is we're probably going to delay warp gate. If I start it, I might cancel it before the Stargate. We'll see. We'll see exactly if that happens. I'm pretty sure it will. And then going ahead and proxying a pylon. And it's also very important to note that at this stage in the game, if Terran were to see only one pylon in our base, they would probably be very suspicious. But fortunately, Protoss builds, for the most part, rely heavily on gas, not minerals in the early game. And so for us, it's very easy for us to afford this third pylon proxied. Again, if we had only one pylon proxied, or only one pylon on our main base and then proxied our second one, not only would it be a little bit too quick for us to afford the Stargate right away, and be a little bit more obvious to the Terran player that we're going for a proxy, but also being able to see two pylons in the main base, Terran really has no idea whether or not we're going to be going for a proxy, because, again, we can afford it, but this is very typical. This is very typical for what Terran players should be saying. Actually, should have overcharged this pylon to kill it. But here we are, we're going to be playing aggressively. We will be building a Stargate here very soon. And once the mothership core is out, we're going to go ahead and chrono boost the adept. We're quickly scanning and trying to find the Reaper. We do eventually find it, and we move immediately across the map. Here's our Stargate. Our adept is phasing across the map. And make sure that you keep tabs on the probe, not being too far ahead of the adept, because you do not want it to get picked off. Now here's our adept. Our second adept in the meantime is defending against the Reaper. And this adept zones out these marines to allow us to build 3 pylons at the base of the ramp. And I'm sure this is something that you've seen a lot, but primarily this is going to be effective whenever you see your Terran player going for a Reaper and then reactive marines. Because this marine count, one mothership core can fight 2 marines. It loses to 3 marines, but a mothership core and an adept working together can actually do very effective damage, even against this high marine count. So in the meantime, chrono boosting these pylons. I'll go for the depot to try and supply lock him, although he might have seen this coming and already... Oh no, it's the third CC is why he has all this extra supply. Able to kill a depot. Usually there would be a second depot here in the reactor. And this is a mistake by me, of course, losing the mothership core. But in the meantime, chrono boosting out an oracle. And we do get a significant amount of damage done. If you would imagine we hadn't lost the mothership core, we would be able to do a little bit more damage here. In the meantime, we sent our Adept Shade into the natural. We went ahead and killed 2 Marines, and also being able to send our Adept Shade into the natural and pull the Marines that way allows us to open up the area for our Oracle to come in, because we know that the Cyclone is going ahead and attacking these pylons, and realistically, there's no reason for the Terran player not to. So here we are, doing significant amounts of economic damage to our Terran opponent, just with these 3 pylons, our first Adept, our first Mothership Core, and a proxied Stargate. We're actually up to quite a few. Oh no. Oh, I meant to hit Control R, I hit Control E. It's okay, it's okay. We'll get back, we'll get back. What is Mubin on about? I have no idea. Alright, let's see. Okay, this one more time. Adept does quite a bit of damage here. Make sure I Control R instead of Control E. And already 8 workers killed, which puts us at a pretty significant worker advantage. And again, back at home, we're going for the Twilight Council now. We're going to be adding our additional gateways, and we're going to be building a robo very shortly. We're going for basically the same army composition, just a little bit of a different flavor of opening. Robo, Twilight, increase our gateway count, and then eventually take a 3rd base. Here we are setting a 2nd Oracle into the main, doing a little bit more economic damage. Pulling that out when we see the Cyclone. Please pull it out. We do lose this one to the other Cyclone in the main base, but altogether, very effective harassment. 14 workers killed at 5 minutes in the game is really, really nice. And so now here we are. We've gotten our Twilight Council up. We've gotten our gateways up. Our robo facility is almost done. We're going for 1 forge as opposed to 2. Again, this is a little bit of a different flavor. For me, generally, if I'm going to build my forge on 2 bases, I'll build 1. If I'm going to build my forge on 3 bases, I'll build 2. So I built this forge a little bit earlier, just getting +1 armor. Going for blink. Have a robo. Should be starting unit production on that very shortly. But we're able to do quite a bit of damage with our oracles. This one proxy Stargate does so much damage. And one of the reasons why it's so effective in its harassment is, again, because of the pressure that we did with our first Mothership Core and our first Adept. Already up to 17 workers killed, and we have lost, I believe, 2 oracles, but this is really cost-efficient trading, because most of the units killed are very expensive units and very valuable units, such as cyclones and SCVs. Already 20 workers killed. In the meantime, as I talked about before, denying the 4th base is a very important thing in PvT. Typically, Terran players aren't going to be looking to kill these pylons until they actually go to take their 4th. And so for me, this is a really comfortable position to be in. Building these pylons, knowing absolutely certainly, whenever he does try to take his 4th base, whether it's at 8 minutes, at 9 minutes, anything like that, we're going to have a very good idea. And here we are again in the mid-game. We have a reasonable sentry count. We have a lot of adepts getting resonating glaives because we are delaying our Templar archives a little bit to get a second forge out. And now beginning our mortal production. And how many observers are we out? Oh, no observers. I suppose that's because we have the map control with the Oracle that we can cast Revelation on the Terran army. Typically, again, we would typically see observers. In this case, we're going to be using oracles for the vision. And this is exactly where we were. If you think about strictly the army composition and strictly what tech structures we're going to be having on 3 bases, this is really similar to what we saw in the first 2 games when we opened really macro heavy. Again, a different flavor, but here we are. Gateway-based army, Twilight Council upgrades, going up to 2 forges, and taking the 3rd base, and eventually working up to Psystorm if we feel it's necessary. One thing that's really enjoyable about PvT and Legacy of the Void is you don't necessarily need Psystorm to be really effective in the mid-game. Even an army composition such as this one is really cost-efficient against Terran. Here we are now warping in more Stalkers. Because we've done so much economic damage, I feel like I have the opportunity to actually go ahead and do a lot of heavy aggression against the Terran player. And we're only up to, let's see, 8 gateways. So this isn't too committed. We're still getting our 2 forge upgrades. Our chrono boost allocation isn't optimal, but it's still pretty good. Now let's actually go a little bit back and see exactly how we're going to go ahead and do this pressure. Excuse me for going so quickly through these replays, but I just want to show a lot of the different gameplay for you guys. For me, it's more important to get you guys like a more variety flavor of exactly what these builds are about, and how this army composition interacts with varying Terran army compositions. Oh my god, I can't speak. In different situations, as opposed to strictly analyzing perfectly 1 or 2 games. And again, you'll have these replay packs available, and I'm going to be doing this kind of gameplay on my stream too after following this show, so you'll be able to get a little bit more of an idea too. So we're starting +2 ground armor, getting +1 ground weapons. Remember those 3 oracles from before? Here we are building a stasis ward, a Terran natural, and dropping 4 adepts and also warping in more adepts. And this kind of 2-prong attack with adepts, stalkers, and sentries would play out very similarly even if we'd gone for zealot charge. We've got our Twilight counts a little bit later than usual, but the upgrade time, oh, it actually is the same. I didn't know this. I really didn't know this. I thought that the upgrade time for charge and the adept attack speed was actually a little bit shorter for the adept attack speed than charge. But it's actually the exact same time, which is 100 seconds. It's blink that's the one that's significantly larger. I was going to say that the reason why I opted for the adept attack speed as opposed to zealot charge in this instance is specifically because adept attack speed researches so much more quickly, but that's actually not true. So that was my logic when I was playing this game, but it's actually not true. So you can imagine this same kind of thing playing out with charge zealots as opposed to adepts, which are more strong, in my opinion, in head-to-head army engagements as opposed to just harassment. And you can also see that working out very effectively. If you want to just imagine that in your own mind, charge zealots and oracles like this working out together in the main base, while we do an attack with charge zealots, sentries, and adepts, with our blink stalkers at the Terran front. Both situations work out very well. They play out a little bit differently because adepts can focus in 2 places at once, even though they're a little bit less effective in head-to-head combat. But very similar gameplay. So here are our adepts. We tried sending them into the 3rd base to meet up with them, but it looks like a little bit of a misclick. They're going up here into the main mineral line instead. And when we open up this window with our 3 oracles and our warp prism, we go ahead and push the front. And so here we are. doing severe amounts of economic damage to your Terran opponent. Once a Terran, we cast Revelation, remember for vision. Once we see that our Terran opponent is sending their bio back to defend the front, we go back in with a Warp Prism, and we do a lot of really dirty Protoss play, where we're now sending the attacks back into the main mineral line, we're continuing the pressure in the front, we force field to the ramp, and we're doing another big warp in the natural. And as a Terran player, it is so difficult, after falling so far economically behind in the early game, to defend pressure like this. And even for me, as a Protoss player, it's a little bit difficult to execute. If you notice, we actually could afford to have significantly higher gateway count. We could have significantly more units warped in the Terran base right now than we do currently, if you look at our income. But instead, doing a lot of damage. These Oracles have so much utility, 2 kills, 5 kills, 11 kills, all these Revelations. Adepts doing so much damage in the main base. Warp Prism eventually does get cleared up, and the natural, but this kind of different flavor of a really aggressive Protoss style. Here I am going to take a 4th base. It's really, really effective. And a lot of Protoss players watch my stream, they'll tell me that they feel like it's really difficult to be aggressive with gateway heavy armies. And as we saw before in the first couple of replays, it can be difficult to just end a Terran. But when you do a more aggressive opening like a proxy Stargate in this instance, you actually open up a lot of opportunities to have aggressive playstyles like this. And it's so much fun to go for a playstyle like this as opposed to go for disruptors, because it makes you feel really, really good doing all these little dirty Protoss tactics. So we're gonna look at one more replay where we do really aggressive openings with oracles, with oh hey Wolf, nice to see you in chat. We're gonna be looking at a little bit more aggressive gameplay with gateway heavy armies, oracles, that kind of stuff, and it's one final replay. And again, I'm going to be doing this kind of gameplay on my own stream following this show, and you will be able to download these replays as well. So let's see. That game was against some Chinese player. I'm not sure who that is. This game is against Natural. And we are going to have to redo all of our BattleNet settings again because, oh, StarCraft 2 engine. StarCraft 2 engine. I do hope it's a really small thing, but I do hope they change this and preserve settings. It's so loud. I do hope they preserve these settings in the future. Let's bring that down to 5%. 33% music. Continuous. Let's listen to Brood Ward this time. Turn on hit points. Disable mouse wheel zoom. I believe that's everything. I want to very quickly look at chat if there are any questions. My 100 APM gameplay might not be cut out for this. A lot of people say that to me too, but you have to consider that a lot of the like if you watch my gameplay, for the most part, admittedly, a lot of actions that I do and a lot of actions that almost every pro gamers are going to do, you'll see they have like 200, 300, 400 APM. A lot of those actions aren't really doing anything. And the reason why, as a pro gamer, I will rationalize this, is because for me, it's a lot easier to actually keep pace throughout the course of the game. Because at certain points, you are going to need that full APM, right? You are going to want to use your full APM, like all 200, 300, 400, whatever it is, to execute something. But it's a lot easier to maintain that as a constant pace as opposed to just playing kind of passively, only doing effective actions, and then immediately spike up from like 150 to like 300, for example. Whenever something gets really crazy, it's a lot easier to keep the pace. And so you saying that like you only have 100 APM and you feel like you actually might not be able to execute something like this, I personally feel like some certain things with multitasking might be a little bit difficult if you're in the lower leagues trying to execute something like this. But the first point, you don't necessarily need to be like an APM master or multitask master, like anything like that, to execute a gameplay style like this. As I said before, a lot of the actions, even for pro gamers, admittedly, are ineffective. It's more about just keeping the good rhythm for when you actually do need to spend that. You actually do need to spend those actions effectively. And primarily, also, you noticed in the macro gameplay, the first couple of games that we watched, we weren't really doing a lot of multi-prong attacks. We're mostly just playing very defensive. We were doing some harassment with a Warp Prism. We were just expanding aggressively. And eventually the game would be decided primarily by one defending the big Terran first push and then doing a counterattack before Terran takes their 4th base. Those were the two situations in which really decided the game from strictly like a mechanics position where we would want to control really effectively. And that is absolutely something you can do with around 100 APM. So my advice to you is to go ahead and just try it, because in my opinion, you don't need to be the quickest player to execute strategies like this, just in general. Even if it's not 100% efficient, I guarantee you'll have a lot of fun doing it. It can be really effective. Oh, let me do one more thing, because I do want to read one or two more questions in chat before we continue with this. And I'd rather not have the sound cut out whenever I alt-tab to read chat. Tell everyone about the popcorn trick. Maybe sometime later. So Maz asks, if Terran goes Cyclone versus Build, will he be able to defend right from the start, even without killing the Prism? And will he then be able to load the first 2 medvacs with Bio or Bio and Mines? 5 Stalkers in the natural doesn't seem like enough. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this game really quickly to answer this question. So you have to keep in mind that if Terran does open Cyclone, if they open Cyclone very quickly, they're going to be doing an opening such as... Even if they're not doing 3CC, they're going to be doing an opening such as Fast Expand and then Barracks, Factory, Starport. Or Barracks, or Barracks, Factory, Barracks, or something to that effect to get the Cyclone out very quickly to deal with the Warp Prism, correct? So the actual number of, I almost said gateway units. The actual number of Bio that they have really isn't too high. And so the pressure that they're able to do, even if they defend everything perfectly, actually isn't too crazy, especially when you consider that you have the option as the Protoss player of 1, expanding your infrastructure. I was talking about how in the first couple of games, often I will choose to warp in more gateways as opposed to warping in more units, just because I know that I'm safe early in the game. And it's a little bit different in terms of... Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, right. So you have the option as the Protoss player, if you will be able to see with your Warp Prism, because you're never going to just lose the Warp Prism. You're never going to want to send it headlong into a Cyclone and allow it to die just to get the units dropped, unless it's some crazy kind of situation. You're always going to have tabs on whether the Terran player is actually moving out or not, and you can make the decision that, like, okay, I'm going to want to have pylons in the front of my third base to be able to defend. I'm going to want to warp in more units as opposed to focusing on upgrades or focusing on building more gateways, that kind of thing. I certainly do not feel like if Terran goes Cyclone versus this opening, he'll be able to defend right from the start and then counterattack and end the game. Because, again, keep in mind, even if you go Disruptor as an example and open Warp Prism and do harassment with that, you're still able to defend that kind of push with Disruptors. Whereas if you go for a gateway heavy army, remember I was talking about how if you open Disruptor and you miss your first 1 shot, or your first 2 shots, or anything like that, if you don't get like the perfect money shot, you're actually in a really difficult position because you invested all this money in the robotics bag, you invested all this money in the first 2 Disruptors, you don't have any upgrades on your gateway units, like it's unlikely for you to have blink and attack speed or blink and charge or anything like that in terms of defense in the early game. It's actually a lot more easy to defend in the same situation if you go for a gateway army as opposed to that. And in my personal experience, I've never been in a situation where Terran player defends with a Cyclone and then counterattacks and is in a very good position. I can see from a theory standpoint where that would be worrying, but in my opinion, it shouldn't be too much of a concern. And if you go ahead and look at the replays in terms of where the Terran Bio scales up when they open for Cyclone, as opposed to how the Protoss army scales up, it's actually pretty reasonable. If you foresee something like that, warping in more units and delaying Storm a little bit is one fantastic way of actually defending really effectively. Just as an example. Anyway, here we are again. This time we're going for the same kind of opening. Proxy Stargate with Pylon Harassment. Although this time I am taking a little bit of a risk and I'm doing this blindly. And this game was played a couple of days ago, I believe. And it's hard for me to recall exactly why I did this. It might have been that I played my opponent a game before, a couple games earlier in the day, and he did like a kind of early aggressive opening. But, or not early aggressive opening, an early Reaper aggression and then go into Reactor. So, for whichever reason we are opting to go for this, you can do this blindly in your own games, but keep in mind, as I said before, if your Terran opponent goes for something such as like straight Reactor on the barracks, the Pylon Rush probably isn't going to be very effective. And again, this is mostly just to showcase the different kind of playstyles you can go for that eventually end up in the same kind of composition, which is a heavily upgraded gateway army that dominates the mid game. And here we are. This Terran player went for a very fast cyclone. We are able to use the map structure to save our mothership core. And him going for a very fast cyclone is one of the reasons why I'm pretty sure his marine count is so low. So here we have sending an adept. Yeah, notice this. Remember we were talking about if the Terran player goes for a very quick cyclone, wouldn't he be able to defend the first few pushes and then counterattack and be in a good position? This game, I know it's a little bit different than what you were talking about, but this is the kind of situation that, even though it's a little bit different, this is the kind of situation that's going to play out a little bit similarly, where Terran goes for a very quick cyclone, and then they will probably be able to do some counterattacks with the cyclone, but it's nothing that's going to be absolutely devastating. So we send our first, he's even doing this factory before his command center, I do believe, which is a really safe opening, but we're still able to pressure it, just because of the way the matchup plays out. And so we send in our adepts into the adept shade into the main base. This is a little bit unlikely. The Terran player is always going to have the depot down. That was fortunate for us, but we're able to delay the natural, overcharge the pylons in the front, and focus on the supply depots, supply blocking the opponent, and then focusing on the reactor. And in the meantime, focusing on getting the Oracle out, increasing our gateway count, and soon we'll be building, once again, Robo and Twilight. In this situation, you're always going to have to make a decision, if the Terran player goes for Fast Cyclone, whether you want to actually save the mothership core, or whether you want to focus on getting the maximum amount of overcharge out. In this case, I went for the max amount of overcharge. There's realistically no way for me to defend the mothership core against a cyclone, because it's just such a quick cyclone. And so for me, I chose to continue overcharging, focus off killing maybe 1 or 2 more marines, delaying the reactor a little bit more, and just trade out the mothership core, because it is only 100. So here I do know that he went for a very fast cyclone, and so I'm waiting until I have 2 oracles. And because our Terran opponent went for these cyclones, I'm going to wall off the front of my ramp, just because I don't want to deal with any of that kind of pressure. The cyclones will be able to kill these pylons, but it'll take a little bit of time, and we'll be able to get our mothership core out in the meantime. Because he doesn't have vision on the ramp, the lock-on won't be permanent. So we will be able to defend this just with overcharge. And so here we are. Overcharge. One cyclone immediately goes down. I believe it is, how much? 30 damage. Purify. Oh wow, it's dramatic. Purify. Oh wow. It does take only, what is that, 5 shots for a cyclone to go down? So two overcharges clear it very quickly. And oracles, if you're ever in the situation where you're building Stargate proxy against oracles, MC taught me this. If the Terran player is building a lot of cyclones, it's perfectly fine for you to build a lot of oracles, because oracles cost the same amount as the cyclone. They're both 150, and oracles, in my opinion, scale a lot better than cyclones do. Because for one reason, the cyclones are probably going to want to be split across bases to defend both mineral lines against harassment. And then also, you're able to micro this oracles a lot more effectively because you are the one that's attacking. I keep doing this on accident, hitting backspace. But here we are, 3 oracles moving straight into the main base, focused on the cyclone, pull back the oracle. A little bit fortunate that it survived. And this is just devastating damage. Devastating damage. They do end up losing 2 more oracles, but being able to kill 2 cyclones, a good number of marines, 5 or 6 SCVs, and also being able to scout the Liberator, this kind of thing is really, really good. And again, we go back to the main base, we're getting a Twilight, getting our gateway unit upgrades, we have a Robo for observers, warp prism, that sort of thing. A reasonable number of gateways, usually ranging from 3 to 5, and then taking a 3rd base, and we're adding already our 5th and 6th gateway. And so this kind of plays out, again, similar to the way that it does in the economic openings. Just a little bit of a different flavor in terms of aggression. But we still are going towards the same general mid-game composition, which is so powerful in the mid-game. Oh, it's cute. I guarantee you I was very upset about this when the game was actually being played. A little bit more harassment with the oracles. We have our warp prism now. Liberator's a little bit of annoying. That was a cost-efficient Liberator, but that's mostly because we weren't paying attention to our stalkers when he did come in. And generally, remember we talked about the first game that we did, we showcased this aggression, is when we open Oracle and we do this pressure, we're able to typically do some kind of gateway aggression follow-up, just because, one, we know fully whether the Terran players could be prepared or not, so we can make a decision if they're going to be playing really aggressively, if we want to be playing defensively back at home, or in this case, they were building out cyclones, playing defensively, and we did manage to kill, I think, like 4 cyclones or something so far this game. So I know that they've invested a lot in defense. We know that we're in a pretty good position economically because of the workers that we've killed. Even if it's only 7, that's still pretty significant in the early game. Look at this, 65 to 42 workers. we're able to go ahead and warp in a lot of Blink Stalkers and play aggressively in this way. And this goes back to the same kind of multi-prong attack. We do see that they have a missile turret in their natural, so we pull back. But here we are with a lot of Blink Stalkers, a good number of Oracles, and we're able to play really aggressively. And although we do lose the Oracles, being able to outproduce our opponent with all of these Stalkers, even going up to 2 Warp Prisms, 1 for the natural and then 1 for the front, is really, really good for us. And even just these Stalkers with no Forge upgrades whatsoever, just straight Stalker, because of the economic advantage that we have, and because of us killing so many Cyclones, for example, with our Oracles, we're able to do so much damage with just these units. In the meantime, Warp and Adepts, and even with the Adept attack speed upgrade, unresearched, able to do a lot of damage just because we're pulling the Terran apart. And this is all when the Terran player is on 2 command centers. There's still no 3rd CC. We're fully saturated on 3 bases, actually well oversaturated on 3 bases. Well, too many probes this game, but still able to do so much damage. And this is one of the things that you really wouldn't be able to do if you're investing in Disruptors, for example, in PvT. Just a very powerful army composition to have in the mid game. Eventually, going to have enough to kill him. Taking a little bit longer than I would like. One thing that admittedly is a little bit of a mistake this game is how late my 2 forges are. I was a little bit overconfident, thinking I could just end the game with the early pressure, but already going up to 4 bases against 2 CC. As you can tell, just the pressure in the early game is enough. And this army composition, as I was showing before in the first 2 replays, you don't necessarily need to end the game early for the gateway units to be effective. Again, remember the first 2 games we went up to Storm 3, 4, 5 bases with 2 forges, and our army composition was able to trade really well, even with a Terran player that's gearing up with Liberators and Siege Tanks on 3 and 4 bases. And so, excuse me, but this composition is really powerful through all stages of the game. And then late game, although we didn't get to see it in these replays, once we get up to Tempest, that's very powerful. So we're actually quite a bit over time. So I'm going to spend these next 5 minutes answering questions in chat. I was honestly expecting this to go maybe 45 minutes to an hour. But yeah, we'll go a little bit longer. We'll go 5 more minutes. We'll answer these questions. And then I believe we'll be ending the VOD. And I'll post the replay pack in chat. And I'm sure Lycan will have the replay pack available on the VOD for everybody to download if you would like to download that. So let's see. Hi, Rooter. Hi, I'm a Protoss player in Bronze League. I got a coaching lesson from a Grandmaster Protoss, and he taught me my Adepts per minute, APM, is too low. So I'm trying to raise it. Do you have any advice on that? Adepts are quite good. You can build quite a few Adepts with this opening if you choose. I typically prefer to go more Blink Stalker, but this is a good build if you want to focus on increasing your Adepts per minute. I have another question. This is from Moz. The earlier game you made 4 observers. They were spotting drops in the front rather than being with the army and close to mineral lines. Meaning that if you spot the drop, Widow Mines can still do a lot of damage if they burrow. You didn't hockey any odds at this stage of the game. Aren't Widow Mines a problem? If you do this, basically convince me what you're doing is better than what I am doing. So to answer this question, for the most part, I find that it's more effective, even in the situation that the Terran opponent is dropping Widow Mines, it's more effective to have the observers out on the map, spotting for the dropships before they come. 1, so you can be aware that they're coming, and if Widow Mines begin dropping out of the medevac, you can immediately pull your probes. And then 2, to be able to possibly even intercept the drop or just deny it outright with something like Blink Stalkers or Photon Overcharge, anything like that. And you would also notice that it's kind of hard because you don't see the map like... Here I am in the menu. It's a little bit hard for you to actually visualize this, but imagine like the main mineral line is right here, and the observer is going to be off to the side a little bit, spotting for the drops. If you do see the Widow Mines come in, you just select the observer, bring it back, clear the Widow Mines, and then send the observer back out there. And if I do play a Terran player, for example, that does a lot of Widow Mine drops, like it becomes like a really crucial part, like Fantasy when he played full time. I do believe he did retire, but whenever I would play Fantasy, he was one Terran player that really loved Widow Mine drops at all stages of the game. And against Fantasy, whenever the Widow Mine drops would begin to become a problem in the mid and late game, I would just warp in one cannon on each mineral line, or even up to 2 cannons if you just really want to shut it down. And so then you still have the detection. But for me, personally, I find it to be a lot more effective to actually have the observers out on the map. So in this particular situation, it might be a little bit better if you're dealing with Widow Mines, but if you imagine if the Terran player goes for like a Doom drop with like 4, 5, 6 medevacs, or even like more with Liberators, like just imagine how difficult that would be if you saw it when it got to your base as opposed to a couple seconds before. State, why don't you storm drop Reno? I do that occasionally. Occasionally. Not in these replays. Let the observers follow unit is good. Yeah. Typically, if my Terran opponent will have a lot of Widow Mines, I will have my observer bound with my Blink Stalkers on control group 2. That's typically what I do. State, what would you say is the optimal late game PvT army? See, for me, I really love the gateway-centric style. I find disruptors aren't really effective at the top level until it gets very late in the game in PvT, when Terran has too much micro going on to actually be able to dodge those shots effectively. But even then, personally, I still prefer to go up to Templar. So for me, my optimal late game PvT army, and this is a stylistic thing because again, I'm going to be biased to my own personal playstyle, right? For me, the optimal late game PvT army is a solid number of Tempest to deal with Liberators and Siege Tanks if Terran's going Liberator, Siege Tank, or anything like that. A solid number of Tempests, an Oracle for Revelation, and just a really powerful ground army with a lot of gateway units, 3/3 upgrades, Psionic Storm, Sentry for Guardian Shield, and a heavy number of Immortals. That's arguably the best composition in my opinion, for me. State, do you give out replay packs for your ladder games? Yes, basically every day on my stream I release replay packs. And if you want to watch my stream, that is twitch.tv/StateSC2. I'll be playing on that stream immediately following this show, and I stream from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. KST almost every weekday. Fear Dragon asks, hey State, do you feel the proposed Mothership core nerf 50 energy instead of 25 would cause any problems with defending early aggression with the macro version of this playstyle? Personally, it might make things a little bit more different. You might want to have a little bit more gateways to have more gateway units as opposed to, no, I'm just not trying to log in right now. Thinking about on it. You might want to have a little bit more gateway units just because the overcharge isn't able to cover as much ground because there's less of them. But it's not so much a nerf as it is a rework, because keep in mind, it will last, I think the proposed change would have the overcharge lasting 5 seconds longer and dealing like 50% more damage or something. So it's not exactly a nerf, it's just more of a rework. So you might need to be a little bit more conservative. You might have a little bit more gateways early in the game just because you can't cover as much ground with the overcharge. But no, I don't feel like it would cause any significant problems with defending early Terran aggression with this playstyle. Is this a new channel? Yeah, the Evolution Chamber is a relatively new TV show. TV show. Show on Twitch. Excuse me. State, the trickiest part to this is picking the Terran that does get the 4th up. At what point do you decide it's time to stop denying bases and switch to Tempests? So that is true. If the Terran player is able to get the 4th base up with the Planetary, it can be very difficult to actually break them. And one of the macro games that I didn't actually get into because of time constraints today was specifically because I wasn't able to deny the 4th base. And so for me personally, this is the way that I would play it out, is I would continue to try and trade cost effectively with a Terran player because gateway units are very good about that at almost all stages of the game, and try and deny them from getting to a really heavy Liberator count. And typically I would go into Tempest once I'm certain that Terran has their 4th base up and I'm not going to be able to break them immediately is when I would begin my Tempest transition. And it wouldn't be a massive transition. I wouldn't go for if I'd Stargate Tempest or anything crazy. I would just get enough Tempest to be able to deny an extended Liberator siege, and then your army composition still plays very well. It's still the same dynamic as before, where you're able to trade efficiently if you get good engagements. You're going to be a little bit ahead on upgrades until Terran gets 3/3, and then you should be even. And the Tempest can deal with Liberators once you get to that stage of the game. So to answer the first part of the question, denying bases and switching to Tempests, that would be around the time that Terran's getting a 4th base, and around the time that you're taking a 5th base. And how to break Terran after that is typically you would try and deny the 5th base, otherwise you would wait until you get a very good engagement, some kind of crucial win, and then push in. I stated I just got back into SC2 since Wings of Liberty, and you showed some good PvT gate playstyle, but it feels like there's a lot of micro to be involved. I can completely out-macro a Terran, but still get wrecked in the big fights. So the micro part is true for the really aggressive gameplay that I showed in the previous 2 replays, but the first 2 replay is more macro-focused. I'm not sure whether you saw that at the beginning of the stream, but it kind of plays out similar to the way it would in Heart of the Swarm, where critically, the most important micro is going to be important in terms of using your blink stalkers effectively, making sure your units are split against siege tanks, that sort of thing. But at the bare minimum, the most important micro is going to be landing good storms and making sure that you have all of your units in a good position when the fight begins. And I feel like that's something that you certainly can do. The last 2 replays did showcase a little bit more micro-heavy play, but if you want to focus on out-macroing a Terran, just doing early game Warp Prism harassment, going up to the Gateway Army composition, that kind of thing still works. Let me see if there's any other questions. State, am I screwed or I'm not ahead in eco in the mid game? I wouldn't say that you're screwed. It's not the ideal situation, but especially with this style, is the Gateway Army composition is really flexible. It allows you to expand a lot more aggressively, and it's really good at defending any kind of early and mid game push. And the army still scales well into the late game up until you have to transition to Tempest. So the real perk of it is that you're able to expand aggressively. And so if you're behind in eco, for whatever reason, if there's like a Widowmine drop that kills like 8 to 16 workers, you will need to play it a little bit differently and aim a little bit more for the late game, but I don't think you're completely screwed. If anything, I would still say that it's better than Disruptors, just because you're going to be a little bit more versatile and flexible. So I'm going to take 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're going to be ending the show today. Sayu asks, in the first game, why didn't you drop the High Templar Shrine instantly after Twilight finished? Maybe delaying Blink a bit if you can afford it. So one thing that I've noticed in my personal games is Storm, for example, is really effective when the Terran's going to have big clumps of units, and that typically happens later in the game. Earlier in the game, Gateway units trade very well, especially with Immortals, and so just having a good number of Adepts, good number of Charge Zealots, good number of Blink Stalkers is enough to defend on 3 bases. I'll typically typically transition to Templar, in my own gameplay, is before I take a 4th base. So just sometime on 3 bases before I take a 4th is when I'll transition to Templar. It's not necessary on 2 bases, and it's even not necessary on 3 bases, but after that it does become very good to get into Templar Archives. Okay, 1 more question. What are the differences between Storm and Disruptive playstyles in PvT? What changes? So this is a very good question to finish on, because this is, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, most players in North America and Europe, most Western players will focus primarily on going for Disruptors as their main DPS in the mid game. Excuse me, my throat's kind of dry after all this speaking. Most Terran players, or not Terran players, Protoss players will go for Disruptor styles in the mid game and PvT in North America and Europe, from what I've seen. And primarily the main difference between going for a style that's focused on gateway units with Storm and heavy upgrades and a style that focuses mostly on Disruptors is, 1, the gateway style is a lot more flexible and versatile, in my opinion, primarily because there are significant windows where the Disruptor playstyle is vulnerable, and the Disruptor playstyle does have some significant weaknesses, although it does admittedly have some significant strengths. And the Terran player that you're playing against, for example, is not the best in terms of control, or they make some mistakes and you get a big Disruptor shot, it puts you in a fantastic position if they get a good Disruptor shot. But in my opinion, it's not worth the risk of the Terran player actually being able to dodge it, because if for whatever reason, even if you get the shot off perfectly, like Terran being able to lift up the units in a Metax and then drop them, or that kind of thing, any kind of situation such as that one, it would be a little bit difficult for you to actually get a good engagement on the Terran player if you miss your Disruptor shot, you know? And so there are certain windows, particularly when you're taking a 3rd base, and then also after you've taken your 3rd base and you're trying to defend drop harassment, that in my opinion are very vulnerable when you go for a Disruptor playstyle. And that vulnerability does not really exist when you go for a gateway style. And besides that, stylistically the difference is, when you go for a gateway style with Templar, the army composition is very powerful regardless of whether you can land Disruptor shots or not. There's never any risk involved in that kind of thing. And it's also very versatile in terms of like your army composition. You're gonna have a lot of gateway units with upgrades. You're gonna have two forges. You're gonna have charge, blink, adept attack speed. You're good in even small situations like defending drop ships and that kind of thing. Because any unit where you warp in is gonna be really powerful. And also because your army composition is so powerful in the mid game and it's so reliably effective in the mid game, it's really easy for you to expand aggressively and take a third base very quickly, take a fourth base very quickly, and even go beyond that and go into Tempest and then fifth base and later in the game. And so for me, that's the reason why I prefer gateway playstyles. Is it's really enjoyable, it's a really effective way, and it's incredibly reliable. It's very, very reliable. The one weakness I would say that isn't quite as true with disruptors but still exists to some respect is how hard it is to actually break the Terran player when you go for this kind of playstyle, just because Liberators and like the Terran Rally makes it a little bit more difficult to actually end the game. And so again, like the focus for me primarily when I play for this gateway style is to focus on preventing the Terran player from getting up to 4 bases, and if they do get to 4 bases, then focus on continuing to expand them and also go into Tempest to deal with the late game Liberators. Anyway, if you guys have any more questions, or if you would like to see any more of these games or anything like this, I'm going to be streaming probably within 5 or 10 minutes on my own channel. That is twitch.tv/StateSC2. As I said before, I stream from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. KST every weekday, and 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. KST every weekend, with the exception of, for example, when I'm doing this show right now, I'm streaming here on this channel, or when I have like a tournament I need to prepare for, that kind of thing. I may take a couple days off beforehand, but I hope you guys did enjoy the analysis. I'm actually not sure who the next guest of the Evolution Chamber is going to be. Let me try and see. Just to get a quick plug-in for the next show. Oh, okay, I see. So the next show will be tomorrow, and the host will be Gemini. He is another really good Protoss player, so hopefully he'll have some other interesting analysis too that you guys can enjoy. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do sincerely appreciate it. This is actually, I was honestly a little bit nervous going into this because this kind of format is something that I have really very little experience with, kind of like hosting a show and doing my own analysis. So hopefully it was good for you guys because it was a really fun experience for me too. I'm going to be streaming on my own channel, like I said, in just a few minutes. So I'll see you guys there. If you're interested in watching these replays, I'm going to be posting them in chat in just a moment. And on the VOD, I'm sure Lycan, I'm going to send the replays to him. He'll have those hosted for you to watch in the description of the VOD. So thank you again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you guys next time, hopefully.